Our society has more resources at our disposal than ever before, apparently, but we are miserable.
That these people, from my own experience, I've seen that they've grew up with immense kind of childhood trauma. They've been given none of the toolkit that I was given in my life to go on and succeed.
So when it comes to practicality of giving the model, it's all good wishy-washy things, but people need something they can do.
If there's anything we should do to solve this problem of unhappiness and misery is find meaning. We need to find meaning.
It's random, so the system doesn't work. But it's worse than that because
with a global financial collapse on the horizon, even more detrimental than in 2008. What are the state politicians and privateers going to do as we face imminent failure? Well, there is hope in one man, ready to confront the challenge more than the rest, with a mission to change the world and to create a freer society. He might just be our only catalyst left and the source of truth that the next generation deserves. Phillip Ullmann, thought leader and social entrepreneur.
You said we don't live in a meritocracy. Oh, we definitely don't, but I don't think we should. Let me explain to you why. Meritocracy is dangerous because the people that succeed end up with massive egos, and it's just because they happen to, it's all chance. I was fortunate, many people are fortunate. I could have equally been one of the homeless people that Josh is dealing with. I was lucky, and why should a merchant banker earn tens of millions of pounds and a street cleaner who's keeping our roads safe earn much less? It's random. So the system doesn't work, but it's worse than that because the people that succeed become egotistical, feel superior, and they end up with hubris and don't care about others. And those that don't succeed in the meritocracy blame themselves. That's the trouble. In the old system, the feudal system, if you didn't succeed, you could blame it on the fact that I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and therefore it's not my fault. Now in a meritocracy, where it's also not your fault, you feel it's your fault because I could have got better education, I could have got better A-levels, I could have got a better job. No, it's the job, it's still meaningless, so it's dangerous for people, and it's creating immense mental health issues because people feel that they are failures, and they're not.
Yeah, I mean, it's like just all the media coverage over the last few days about the homelessness issue of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, saying it's a lifestyle choice, and that's basically just saying to people, it is your own fault, and completely ignoring the systemic issues. The fact that these people, from my own experience, I've seen that they've grew up with immense kind of childhood trauma. They've been given none of the toolkit that I was given in my life to go on and succeed. And kind of all of that's ignored, and people are often these days blamed for their own circumstances. And I think, it is important, much more so, that we should be looking at the systemic factors that are leading to people to these kind of situations.
Right. We could talk more about this, obviously, but we're going to talk about the elusive pursuit of happiness, which is probably where this conversation was going to go anyway. I'm going to start with you, Mark. Our society has more resources at our disposal than ever before, apparently, but we are miserable. Why is that?
So we're conditioned to be miserable. So in our thought patterns, it's the way that we think. You just have to make a simple observation, and people complain about mundane things like the weather. It's not even important, but they will. They'll complain. It's in their language patterns. So if you just observe, I could be speaking from a UK perspective, but if you just go into a typical Tesco Express, right, people are not very happy. People don't seem to be very happy just by default. Now, lots of arguments are things like the sunshine. I'm not a big fan of taking power away from the individuals themselves. And I think where it really stems from is a lack of perspective, a lack of gratitude. Now, I'm fortunate, I've seen a lot of different things. So I can't expect other people to say, right, you need to just be grateful naturally because other people have it worse than you. I understand it's not really a strong argument to make. However, it's the best move that you can make. So if you've not been fortunate to maybe struggle or go through things where you build the mental toughness, well, then you have to induce it yourself. You have to find ways, and even if it's on an incremental level, because we lack discipline, we find purpose in superficial things like the supercar, like the jumper, the designer wear, and what Victor was talking about earlier with the social media world. It's very difficult not to compare when you're seeing a highlight reel of people's best lives, and that's it. So you think that you need to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, and then you're in that perpetual loop of thinking that you're not good enough, when it's in actuality, most people behind closed doors, even with some sufficient amount of wealth, are deeply unhappy because they do lack purpose.
Lacking purpose, is that right, Victor? Social media, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, it's a disease. It's a disease, and I mean, I'm a heavy user of social media because they can. I think with any platform or tool, they can be bad, they can be good. But to Mark's point, I mean, I don't believe we're conditioned miserable. I think the real crux of it is this comparison. You know, my mum always told me the comparison is the thief of joy. And I think generally we just compare ourselves too much. And then I'm going to also borrow a theory from a man named Mo Goddard, and he has a book called A Soul for Happy. And his theory is that we are happy, or happiness is like an equation. Again, I use a lot of equations, sorry, it's not my economics background, but it's an equation, sort of like what happiness is our expectations of events in our lives, you know, and also our perceptions of what we think our life should be like. So if there's sort of a gap, it causes unhappiness. So very, very simple example, and I'm sure we've all been through it. If you're applying for a job and you think you've smashed the interview, you're going to get that job. You're expecting that job, right? And if you don't get the job, you'll feel unhappy. But there's sometimes you interview and if you don't get the job, you don't really care. Like, if it happens, it happens. Then if you don't get the job, yeah, it's because of our expectations. And I feel what's happening now is that we have a lot of expectations as a generation, but we're not meeting them. So that causes a lot of unhappiness. That's just what I sort of believe, and it might be to the point, Phillips, your expectations of certain things have changed over the couple of years, so you don't feel as hard done by. You can walk now and not drive because you have, I guess, you have just a different sort of perception of life.
Yeah. For me, again, go to the Bible, and that's where I get all my ideas. Yes, there's a passage in Deuteronomy 20 which gives the answer to this. Before going to war, there were 4 questions that had to be asked of everybody. The first question is, did you build a household and educate it? And that's saying, did you start to change people's mindset? It's education is critical, but enabling people to understand how to care for each other. Education is not just A levels, and it's actually understanding how to live a meaningful and purposeful life and influence others for the better. We should all have obligations to improve, so that was the first stage. You have to have an impact on other people. You have to start to change their lives. That gives you happiness. That gives you joy. A supercar definitely doesn't give you joy. A massive house doesn't give you joy, but a beautiful family gives you joy. So the first point we'll come back to is effectively the building a household. And that, I don't mean literally is a family. We'll come back to that. The first point is literally people who are educating others to learn how to live meaningful lives. The second point is planting a vineyard, and that means a meaningful job. So that you have to have a meaningful job where that job enables you to impact other people positively and to impact the planet. Again, if you're not meaningful, if you're just a small cog in a big machine, which is what most people are, not making decisions, they might as well be parts of a dead machine. So we have to have, and that's the beauty of the vineyard. That's the metaphor the Bible uses, because it's real. You grow grapes. You relate to the land. You produce wine. You share that wine. You hopefully don't get drunk, but effectively a meaningful job where you share and make people happy, and wine does make people happy, again, is a message for happiness. The third thing is marrying a woman. And it may not be politically correct, but that's the world we live in, that a man has to marry a woman and has children. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, beautiful wife, wonderful kids and grandchildren, that's true pleasure, spending time. It doesn't need any money, just sitting down with the grandkids, all the children, and actually, and the wife, and sharing and having a cup of tea on a Sunday afternoon, or in our case, Friday night, Saturday lunchtime, is true joy. And the fourth question is, do you live in fear? So, which we talked about before, we all live in fear. Victor lives in fear because you're struggling to get on the ladder. You can't buy property if you're living at home and you're renting, whatever. It's not fair.
But I wouldn't even say I live in fear. I mean, I think, again, it goes back to what you're believing, your perceptions. And because of my faith, I don't live in faith. You know, the Bible says, do not be anxious. I'm not anxious about a lot of things. However, I do acknowledge a lot of things that go on. I do acknowledge challenges, difficulties. But again, I would say I'm an anomaly. I would rightly say I'm an anomaly.
You're blessed. But Josh's homeless people are living in fear.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So those, to me, that's the Bible's angle on how to live a life of happiness.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, to me, it kind of relates back to the first question we were discussing. I think this question of happiness, and I think, you know, as you say, we live in a time now where we have more resources and more wealth than at any time in human history. But we also live in a time where issues such as suicide and addiction is at its highest level in history also. So what's going wrong? You know, if wealth and resource is the key to happiness, then why, you know, are we experiencing these issues of addiction and suicide? And I think for me, we have a crisis in this country of purpose. It's a crisis of meaning, and that's whether that's people stuck in jobs that they don't want to be in, or whether it's, you know, the kind of Instagram comparisons or the kind of thing we're all on of trying to chase, you know, that thing of success. And then when you realize, when you get the supercars, you realize it's actually hollow, you know. And I think it's around the culture for me, which kind of leads to this crisis of purpose and crisis of meaning. And I think, you know, if we could address that, you know, as you said about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is self-actualization, and you feel that you need to have a certain amount of money to enable you to pursue that self-actualization, which I can totally understand. I think, you know, unfortunately, many people have kind of conflated purpose with money, and money becomes the purpose. And I think when that happens, you kind of strive for that and you realize it's hollow and you have this kind of crisis of purpose. So I think for me, that's a key thing around addressing happiness. And again, to your point about family, I just became a new dad about a year ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. You know, and that's just given my life a whole different purpose, and it's kind of unlocked a happiness in me that I didn't realize, you know, existed. So I think, yeah, these kind of factors of family, parenthood, that kind of thing is really what gives happiness, I think, and just generally having a purpose in your life.
Mark, there's a conflict, isn't there, here? Because those without the money think the money is going to help them. Those with the money realise that the money has helped them a little bit, but not as much as they wanted it to, and often go full circle.
Indeed, and I've got another side of it, which is I don't think that prioritising happiness is always a good metric to follow, because majority of the time people are not happy, and it doesn't mean that because they're not happy they're miserable. I don't want to.
Would you say you're a realist?
To a degree, but it's more so. I think it's more effective to imagine you take the next generation of people, the younger the school, in the schooling system, and say that your success or you need to find happiness. Most people don't even know how to define what it is. So if they're constantly seeking and searching for something, the moment that something goes wrong, I think it's a very fragile individual, because then they're not happy. So when things don't go to plan, suddenly they feel unhappy again. And it's always this yo-yo of, I feel good, then I don't feel good. I don't think that's a good mental model for people to follow. I think a better model for people to follow is what I've lived my life, is a sense of duty. Like, I've not particularly felt happy all the time when I lived in a council estate. But my dad, he had a stroke when I was 5 years old, so I had to grow up very fast taking care of my family. When I was unhappy, I wouldn't have the thoughts of, I'm helpless, because that takes power away from me. I would think, right, it's still my responsibility to take care of my family. I think that actually just puts people in a more effective position to do good and to do better. So I don't really live my life based off of seeking happiness, because, I mean, it's a never-ending thing, just like the supercar or the house. You realise they are very hollow, as to what Josh said, and you can find more purpose in family. It's the simple things. When I take my dogs for a walk and I'm in the forest, I get more happiness out of that. I really do.
I can't say I disagree with you. I'm still a bit jealous of the supercar. So if we're tackling this in society, I want to use these next few minutes from each of you, and, you know, say as much as you want on this. What do you think the steps should be for people to change their psyche of this circle that is never ending?
Yeah, it's a tough one to approach from different angles. One thing I would say, actually, it relates to a book I've read. You've said very key points on this book, but it's called A Man's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl. And he talks about his experiences in concentration camps, and he talks about this idea that, you know, I think you mentioned it, meaning. We need to find meaning. Yeah. I think that if there's anything, you know, we should do to solve this problem of unhappiness and misery, is find meaning. And that's why a lot of people then venture off to faith, because I think the deepest desire of man is to find, you know, their purpose. And essentially, I believe, you know, you can only find that when you get in tune with God, because God's giving you a purpose. I say that nobody created themselves. That's what I believe. So I think even if we look at it on a practical level, how do we find meaning and purpose? It's also understanding that, you know, you can't be happy all the time. There is going to be suffering, and it's how do you find meaning in that suffering? And that's the whole concept of, you know, I think it's logotherapy, logos meaning in Greek. How do we find meaning? How do we search for meaning? And when we've understood that, we can then sort of conceptualize all the challenges, events that happen in our lives, and is this meant to happen? Is there a purpose? Is there an outcome? Or look on the bright side in the most simplest terms. I think that will solve for a lot of the comparison, misery, unhappiness that's going on in this generation.
Some people don't want to go down the religious route, and I think we have to talk about that. So there has to be another way, surely, Josh.
I mean, I think for me, if I could try and distill what I believe can bring happiness, is, I guess, service. You know, and whether that's service as a parent to your children, or whether that's service in what you do. You know, I started this discussion talking about how my big inspiration was Muhammad Yunus, and he gave a speech to some of the richest people in the world at a Forbes conference, and he said that creating a business that makes money for yourself can bring happiness, but creating a business that helps other people can bring a super happiness. And I found that you know, really chimed with me, in the sense that if I look back at my own life, and when have I felt the happiness, that's when I've felt most at service. It's when I've felt, you know, I've seen the tangible impacts of some of the things I've been able to achieve, or, as I say, becoming a new parent, and just having that pure sense of purpose towards this new life. So I think, you know, service for me can bring happiness. I think that's often too overlooked in society.
Do you think you're in a state of super happiness all the time because of what you do?
Of course not. No.
But then I have to ask, why not?
Well, I would agree with Mark that I don't think anyone is, you know, super happy all the time. You'd be a bit annoying if you were, wouldn't you? You know, and I think your emotions fluctuate, and that's good. But I think, yeah, having a kind of framework, as you said, Mark, is the way forward. And I think, you know, what should be at the centre of that framework, I think, of, is service, and that's a good place to start. And generally speaking, it will bring, I suppose, happiness is maybe the wrong word, but a sense of fulfillment. And I think, you know, it's just about having that sense of purpose, which we all crave. You know, and I think having a framework for that's important.
Mark, we've all met those people who look super happy all the time.
Indeed.
And they're not millionaires or billionaires. What's your perception about that? Someone who clearly has stated many times that no one's ever really that happy all the time.
It's clearly a disguise, and it's not always a malicious disguise. It's just maybe they're struggling. I think that judgment is not an effective thing to go by when I see someone that might be overly happy. Instead, you can see it in the eyes more often than not when you look at someone and see they're almost too happy, if that's a thing to go by. But there's something else behind that. I think it's normal to have the fluctuations of emotions, but I approach it with no judgment. I learned that very early on. I think I was judgmental, and then I learned over the years you never know what someone is going through, and especially when you lose a friend or you see things happen, you sometimes can't even see it coming. So I think approaching life with no judgment and going more into the solution of the framework. I'm a very practical person, so when it comes to practicality of giving them a model, it's all good wishy-washy things, but people need something they can do. They need to be able to grab a sheet of paper and write down what is their purpose, or at least what they think is their purpose. What is their why? If money was no object, we don't ask enough good quality questions to even get to that. So then they just compare to their friend or someone they've seen online. That's what happiness is, and that it's not reality as to what would actually make them happy. I remember I asked a close friend. He said, I'm obsessed with a Ferrari. And I know we're going too much into the supercars stuff, but I said, imagine you drive the Ferrari. I was like, do you still want it if you're driving in a rural part of Texas? No one can see you in it. No one knows you have it. You can't post a picture of it. Do you still want the Ferrari? And you have to just stop and think for a little bit. I was like, you don't want the Ferrari. You think you want the Ferrari. And there's nothing evil. There's nothing bad about, you might be a car enthusiast. That's fine. But figure out, what is the route? What do you actually want? And then create a vision and a plan as to what person do you need to become that would give you the traits to accomplish that, and what good do you want to do for the world as a side effect. That's really my mental model.
It's a good model, but I'm just going to pick up on what you said, Mark, and ask Philip for your final thoughts on this. If money was no object, and that is a crucial sentence, really, isn't it, when we're talking about does money make you happy? Because not everyone has that option.
No, I'm back to the argument I've been making throughout, that everybody has needs, very simple needs, food, clothing, family, security, safety. And we need to build a system that enables everybody's needs to be met. Now, when you live a life, as Josh talked about, service, where your obligations are to meet the needs of your family, of your community, of your nation, and you're enabling other people's needs to be met, you're building relationships with more and more people, and healthy relationships is what happiness is. So that is what we have to do.